Yeah, you know, it's pretty crazy. The fact that HYER Boots has been out of the family for over 50 years, and I don't think anyone ever saw it coming back. But here we are driving out to the warehouse to go put our hands on some boots that arrived this morning. All right, you ready to get this thing started? You know, I think that every kid imagines finding a box in their parents' basement that leads them on some type of crazy journey. And for me, the last 3 years has really been that, because in 2019, my grandfather passed away, and I was going through the basement of my grandparents' house, moving my grandmother into a retirement home, and I stumbled across this box. It was full of all these beautiful old cowboy boots and some memorabilia from the old boot factory, everything from different marketing materials to lists of all the legends of the West that wore HYER boots. And so I immediately thought this was something that was really cool, and took it up to my grandmother to ask her about it, and she lit up. She started telling me all these incredible stories, and that's when I really rediscovered HYER Boots. And it was bigger than I ever really expected, and it was more meaningful to her than I could ever imagine. After spending the night talking to grandmother about it, I knew that it was something she was passionate about, and she was going through a really hard time having just lost her partner. And so I thought something that would really cheer her up would be to see if I could get this trademark back into the family. And so I went home and I tracked that trademark down. It just so happened to be owned by Berkshire Hathaway.
When I found out that Berkshire Hathaway owned the trademark, it definitely stopped me in my tracks. It was a little scary. I was like, all right, Zach, sure, go for it. But when Zach sets his mind to something, there's no turning back.
I figured it was going to be there forever. I figured Zach would never get it back. It just didn't seem possible.
I thought that there was no way that they would release it. You know, big companies like that, you know, they get a patent, they just stick it in the patent file.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why people would have thought it was crazy to be going after it. I think after I tracked it down to Berkshire Hathaway, that's probably when most people would have been like, oh, well, it was fun while it lasted. But I became a little bit more determined. I came up with this great plan to get it back, or at least I thought it was a great plan.
So Zach is one of the most optimistic people I know, and he just thought he was gonna call him up and tell him this sweet story about his grandmother, and they were just gonna give him the trademark, but it was not that easy.
No, my plan wasn't that good.
Zach doesn't take no for an answer.
I didn't have a well thought out plan. I just thought, I'm gonna call every Wednesday at 11 a.m. the same time until eventually I get this trademark back.
It got to a point where it had gone too far. People were threatening to sue Zach.
No, yeah, it could get discouraging. I mean, one of the worst parts was that people were getting angry when I kept calling. But that ended up being eventually how I got it back, you know? Somebody got very frustrated that I was continuing to call all the time, and they told me never to call back, but that they would take care of it. And next time I looked at the trademark, it had been dropped, and that was the opportunity for me to relaunch HYER Boots.
So what are you going to do now? Start a boot company?
Well, something changed over those 18 months, because what started as a gift from my grandmother and a passion for restoring a part of my family's history really grew into a passion to restore a part of Western history, and to build a brand that can represent not only the tenacity that it took for my great-great-grandfather to start the business in the 1800s and to pioneer a new wave of footwear, but the tenacity that it's taken to keep that business in our family and to restore it after having lost it for over 50 years. And that tenacity, in my mind, is so key to the Western way of life that there needs to be a brand that embodies it. And HYER can be that brand, not only because of our history, but because of the story and the steps that we've taken to bring it back.
And that's when things really started heating up. Zach needed to learn how to make boots, and even though he came from this long line of shoemakers, his generation wasn't taught how to make boots, so he really had to start from ground zero.
So I decided to start researching anything I could about cowboy boots. And what became apparent was that the best cowboy boots in the world are made in El Paso, Texas, or Leon, Mexico. So I jumped on a flight down to El Paso, Texas, hoping that I'd be able to find a factory to partner with me. But this was 2020 in the middle of COVID, and not only were factories not willing to take meetings, but they were at full capacity. They weren't interested in new clients. And so after striking out in El Paso, Texas, I decided to take my next trip down to Leon, Mexico. And there, while the factories were still at capacity, I was able to find some owners that were willing to take a chance on the brand and on me. But what became apparent was that I didn't know enough about boot making yet to really even know how to start or how to even give these factories direction. So I decided that I needed to really dive in and learn every process about how to make cowboy boots. And the best way to do that was to move to Mexico.
When Zach said he wanted to move to Mexico, it was a no-brainer for me. My bags were already packed.
So I spent the next 18 months in Mexico. Monday through Friday, I'd work at my regular job. Friday and Saturday, I'd go to León and learn how to make boots, network with the different factories, and try to get HYER Boots off the ground. And about 9 months in, I started to have my first boots that were being finished. And I decided to take one of them back to Kansas City to show my grandmother. And I think the exact words she said were, "That's cute, but that's not a cowboy boot." And I immediately had realized that while I had built a boot that I thought was beautiful, it wasn't functional. It wasn't a real cowboy boot. It wasn't what HYER Boots used to make. And the real core of a cowboy boot is the marriage of fashion, but actually the function of the cowboy boot as well too. And I'd missed one of those aspects because I didn't know exactly what cowboys were looking for in their boots. And so kind of in line with exactly what I've been doing so far, I decided the best way to do that was to immerse myself with the actual users of my boots. And so I called my fiance back up and said, "We're moving to Kansas."
I mean, I was thriving in Mexico. We had built this beautiful life down there. We had a wonderful community. And when Zach said we needed to pack up and move home to Kansas, it meant the end of this chapter, but really the beginning of this beautiful new chapter. So I was really excited.
Yeah, so we moved back to Kansas, which was great, not just because we were back around family, but because we were also back around where HYER started. It was the first time that we were ever really able to start calling up different museums and different family members and piecing together the history in a real in-depth way. But it was also great because we were now back in the middle of America by different ranches and different farms where we could go out and spend time talking to real cowboys and real cowgirls, learning what is important in their boots. Yeah, at this point I was ready to go. You know, I felt like I had a good idea of what we wanted to build for the brand, good idea of what we wanted to build for the product, factories that were willing to partner with us to get it off the ground. So we went down to Mexico, started building the product, brought on some team members and a number of different legends in the industry that really jumped on board and started to get the excitement rolling around HYER coming back. Perfect timing, there's our boots right there. And I think that that's why people should care about HYER Boots, because we care about them. Not just enough to give them a great product, but enough to fight to bring it back and to make sure that we can continue to give them a great product.